two points that I really want to go back to really quickly, and just to recap, is I like that you said about people, especially pastors and all that, but people tend to try to recreate something, a moment, a time frame, a time period that was perfect for that time. And I think what popped out to me right away was like, man, how many of us do that in our worship, or how many of us do that when we're reading the Word, right? It's like, man, that feeling or that thought of like, oh my gosh, like the words are jumping off the page, like, and so you want to like recreate that so much so that you're like, okay, cool. I was sitting here last time. I had this song on. I had this shirt. Like, and I think that can be a really, really tricky slash scary space. I know we were talking about as far as people bringing out for events and everything else, but that could be a really tricky place because then you end up missing out on the Holy Spirit, where it's like, hey, Holy Spirit is constantly active, right? Constantly active, constantly. Speaking to us and through us. And so I think when you try to, and again, back to what you said, when you try to recreate a moment, what ends up happening is that then you try to manufacture God.
Yeah.
And we just know good and well that we can't do that. And anytime we've ever tried to, he's always just, all right, well, you think you got it? I'm going to take it this way with you. How does that work in your life, especially as a youth pastor? Okay, especially as a youth pastor, how does that work? Where maybe you had a really good moment or good sermon, good something, whatever, where you're like, man, this was hitting. How do you combat that then? Where it's like, okay, cool, I'm about to see them again next week, or hey, I'm going to go back to this camp, this summer or whatever. Like, how do you combat that feeling of trying to be fresh within the Spirit, right, walking, with God, but also kind of having this tug of war of like, but man, how can I get that feeling again?
I think it's important to understand that the Holy Spirit is not a moment. It's something that we
Ooh, that's
have
good.
to we have to like constantly be led by the Holy Spirit on what's next. And I'll give you an example. I grew up going to a specific church camp. You and I have talked about it before.
Yeah.
It impacted my life. God called me to Bible school at this camp. I met my wife at this camp. I proposed to my wife at this camp. This campus had a monumental part of my life, and in this new season, when I become a youth pastor, I catch myself saying, I want to go back to this camp because of what it did in my life.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
then when we get there, we didn't see the same impact. And it wasn't that God didn't move or that the anything wasn't right, but that season for us may not be the season that we're supposed to be in anymore. We may not need to be at this camp. And so when I got to my new position, I remember being so discouraged because I put the sign up sheet out. I was super pumped about it. I was ready. And the first time we actually had a decent amount of kids signed up, and then good old COVID hit and it shut, everything down, and there were no camps. But then we put a sign up sheet out again for the next year when everything was kind of starting to get back to a sense of normalcy, and no one signed up. And I just remember being so discouraged and so like, God, I know what happens at this camp, and I know that you move at this camp. And
Yeah.
it took my pastor sitting me down and saying, you act as if God can't move somewhere else. You act as
Woo.
if that there's the moment you think happens at camp. You think that for the students to have an encounter with God, for you to have an encounter with God, it has to happen in this setting, in this place, at this time, under this leadership, under these people. But the Holy Spirit's not a moment. God's trying to move somewhere else, and it's probably a new season and something different. But a lot of people, they're so used to what they know works that they don't ever go and try something new that might work better. And we've seen God move so much, and I love that camp, and we still support them and are all for them. And anytime someone's asking for a camp, I recommend them. But it's
Wow.
just not the fit for our group. That it's not where they're getting fed. They want to go and do a retreat, just the small group of them. They want to go and do this thing, and so they're getting fed at other places. And I'm seeing God move in their life because of our obedience to follow where the Holy Spirit's telling us to go and what the Holy Spirit's telling us to do. As far as me speaking, there are times where I've preached a message more than once, and one time I preached it, and several people responded, and everything was just like, man. God's moving. There's another time where I felt like I hit a brick wall, like it was just like, man, I know that I hit every point. I know everything checked out. How come this didn't resonate with them the same way? And I just remember
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit telling me, it's because they're not the same group. They're not the same
Oof.
people. It's not the same setting. You're not the same with this group that you are with this group. When you're youth pastoring, you're with these kids every single week. You are
Right.
the shepherd, but when you go out and do a show, you're not the shepherd. You're just a messenger. You're just a someone sliding through. So it's a lot easier when you're coming in as the messenger, because you're able to
Yeah.
kind of have
Yep.
that one time connect, and everyone's ready to hear it because it's fresh and it's new and it's different. But when you're the shepherd, it's sometimes it's familiarity even for the students, because it's like, oh, I've heard you say that before. I've heard that story before, and so you really have to be led on, okay, what is God actually telling me to say in this moment? What is God actually telling me to do in this moment? Who here is dealing with the things that we're talking about? And how can I actually penetrate past what happened today, past what's going on in their current lives, so that I can hit the heart and that I can make sure that it resonates in such a way that now God can deal with them one on one and be able to speak directly into their lives.